The presenter for this webinar is Neil Thomas, Managing Director and VP Professional Services at ServiceSphere. He has an extensive industry experience in IT, IT support, and ITIL consulting. He specialized in Service Catalog and CMDB. Neil, take it over.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joseph. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you back on the this webinar series, the third in a row that we've been doing. So that's all about me, what we do. Very little about what we do, but my company changed its name just very recently to Service Symmetry. We're an offshoot of what was ServiceSphere. So we do a whole load of bits and pieces around ITIL training, Service Desk Institute training, consultancy, learning, all those good things you've got there. So if you're interested, get in touch with me. But more importantly is the fact that all that good stuff has allowed me to have many years of experience within the industry, especially in terms of ITIL as a consultant, but also as a product manager working for a vendor in terms of constructing and building IT service management product sets right the way through from incident right the way through to service catalog. So I have a pretty extensive knowledge of how this stuff works, both from the inside and also how people in the real world actually take it on and use it. So without further ado, this is the third in the series of for ManageEngine, really taking us through right the way through from the service catalog, talking about how services affect a business and used by the business, what delivers them, the stuff in the configuration management database, configuration items and the like, and then of course the good stuff that we're all familiar with of incident, problem and change, and then the last in the series in a few weeks' time will be how do we measure the service desk performance. So today is all about incident, and it's very interesting to see quite a few of you on the call today. Why are people so interested in incident? It's been around for a huge number of years, and what we're looking at is getting back to some of the basics, and it's very interesting that we should be doing this, because in my role as a consultant I come across so many organizations that want to do incident management. They tick the box, and unfortunately they get it wrong so often that the fundamental principles of incident management are forgotten. So ManageEngine, being the good people they are, thought it would be a good time to just revisit some of those things. So for those of you who are out there, this is a bit of a catch-up. For those of you who are just first into the game and want to know a bit more about it, then this covers off some of the basics that we have around incident management. So we're going to be looking at where it fits within the whole ITIL framework. Just doing incident isn't enough, because there's so many other bits and pieces that you don't necessarily have to do, but you certainly have to understand and consider and put the thing in its context, looking at a bit how it fits in the service desk, how incident compares to service requests, other incident workflows, looking at a bit of knowledge and how that fits in, as well as the whole thing of service level agreements and good old relationship between incident and problem and incident and change. It's all part of the same ITIL framework. So without further ado, we come on to a slide you've seen several times before. These are the services that the company puts out, that IT is supporting and delivering. So these are things that you might find in the service catalog, but certainly are things that a company does, from sales to marketing to field support to credit checking, finance, you name it. All the pieces, all the functions within an organization that it needs to survive. And of course, it's supported by IT and IT services. And of course, those IT services sometimes don't perform quite as they should, which is where you get the whole incident coming in. So let's have a look at that in context. So those are those services right in the middle, and ITIL is there, and IT service management is there to support those services, and that's the key thing. Incident management doesn't just exist to make us feel good and to get us into work on a Monday, although it does provide a lot of people with a lot of jobs. No, incident management is all about making sure the services that are delivered to an organization carry on being delivered, because without them, the company is not being as efficient as it should, and it's likely to have trouble. So the user needs something, they have a service delivered to them by service request or through the service catalog, and if something goes wrong with that service, that's the good old job of incident management. It is a fundamental. If something breaks, we need to fix it. We need to get that service back up and running, because every minute that service is down, it's costing the company money, time, inefficiency, competitors are getting in the way, etc. It's a vital piece of the whole jigsaw. Now, obviously, allied to that is how quickly those people, those services are supported. So the whole idea of service level management comes in here, and we touch on that briefly today. Now, if something keeps going wrong, again, the link between incident and problem comes in here. If something keeps going wrong, then obviously we move over to the whole principle of problem management. And these are processes, best practices that are put out by ITIL as part of their framework, version 3 framework. Now, if it keeps going wrong, we found out what the issue is and we want to fix it, then obviously we start looking into change management, changing things in a very rigorous and defined process manner so that we don't have risk introduced into the organization. We manage risk out of it. The things that, and how we deliver those changes to the business is all to do with release management. We then have what delivers, configuration management, how we making sure that all those services are there in the future, all those other esoteric bits and pieces that we get from ITIL, from availability and capacity, service continuity management, and then of course finally we get through to the managing of those services with the service portfolio and financial management. But you see here that the delivery of service, the stuff of business, the stuff that makes business work, is absolutely vital. And a cornerstone of that, which is why everybody sort of does incident management, of course, is the fact that if it goes wrong, we need to get it up and running quickly. So on we go to incident management. So really, this slide recaps just what I've been wittering on about. It's all there to restore normal service as quickly as possible. I think certainly the people on the service desk, any of you guys that are out there, and certainly from my own point of view, having done this way back in my history, the key thing that users want and get frustrated about is getting on with their job. They know that every minute that they're not working, there is a downside to the business, that the inefficiencies could come in. And sometimes, of course, with big outages, with big problems, we need to get on these things quickly. So having a good incident management process and being able to manage this properly is absolutely vital. So I guess a definition, good old ITIL stuff here, any event that disrupts or could disrupt one of those services that we've been talking about. So the key things, some key facts, I suppose, about incidents. Well, really, an incident could be applied to just about anything. It doesn't have to be IT. Those of you who've got combined service desks know that it could be about facilities, it could be about HR, it could be about services or IT equipment. It can span a whole range of different things. The span and the breadth is really down to you guys. And of course, they can, these days, be reported just about in any means possible. Not just people, as in my day, running up to you and saying, look, I've got a problem, how do I do this, or my computer's broken, but it's reported by email, by phone, by self-service, and obviously now we get into the whole social media aspect by things like Twitter and Facebook, something that I've been working on very recently. Another area that incidents can be, and think where things have gone wrong, if you like, is in infrastructure. And there's a whole piece that's now been carved out in ITIL version 3 called event management, where events that are being detected by network management tool sets automatically raise an incident, and coincidentally can automatically close incidents as well, but at least you have a visibility about what has happened. I'm not going to touch on that very much today, except that they can be raised from that particular way. And obviously, these are normally, all these incidents are normally reported and recorded in the service desk to ensure there is somebody who is managing the whole process and working out what's going on. And all of that stuff produces data. Data is absolutely vital in ITIL to be able to carry on and improve and resolve services, making sure that you can improve the things. So there we are, the key elements, going down to a bit more detail, detecting them and recording them, classifying, investigating, diagnosing them, and then resolving them, and then the recovery, and then closing it down. And in that closure, so this sort of process that ITIL has put forward, the whole point here is that the right information is kept and captured all the way through, and that the process is followed. ITIL is all about best practice, and with incident management, you have to stick to the process, or processes, as we'll come on to later. And it's very important to make sure the different pieces are adhered to, otherwise things start going wrong. And certainly with incident management, I've seen so many groups where They have a process, fantastic tool sets, but the problem is that they just put in garbage data, and of course you put in garbage data, out of the back end comes garbage data. Garbage in, garbage out. You need to be able to make sure that people put in the data in the first place, that the diagnosis is accurate, that it's checked, and that the resolutions, once they come in and are applied to those incidents, are also correct. And obviously a part of this as well is the whole aspect of ownership. Owning a particular incident, or a group within the service desk owning an incident, monitoring it, working out what's happened to it, tracking it through the various groups, and communicating to the various groups within the service desk, and of course to the good old user at the end, who is the person who is sitting there waiting for that service to be restored to him. Incident management, ITIL, and the service desk do not exist for their own benefit. They exist for the benefit of the organization and to ensure that services are restored as quickly as possible. So there is an incident management process showing the different feeds in from the top. And it's worth just running through some of these things here, whichever way it comes in. We identify the incident, we start categorizing it in ITIL, and indeed the whole service desk principle is about trying to manage things through classification. We look at the types, we look at the different pre-existing types that we've got, so that we can start working out whether it's hardware, software, a particular piece of software, a particular person, or a time of day, or a group. So we want to start understanding it data, and then once we've got the data, we can look at it and use trend analysis to ensure that we understand what's going on. So we log all the data, we categorize it, and we'll come on to some of these pieces in a minute. Is it a service request? If it isn't, service request being something that somebody wants, and I'll say we'll come on to that in a minute, we then start saying, right, what's the priority? And of course we prioritize according to the service that's being affected. Is it a major incident? Again, something that we'll come on to in a minute. Or is it just a general run-of-the-mill thing? If it's major, it gets treated in a different way. You then do an initial diagnosis, quick look at it. Now, does that incident need to be escalated? Have we got all the data? Have we got the skill sets and the tools to be able to resolve that here and now? If we have, we get on and do it. If we haven't, then it goes off, and it goes off to other groups for a hierarchy or a peer escalation. And of course, as we come into the end of the process, we look at resolving it, making sure we've got the resolution accurately put away within the incident, and then we look at the recovery and what needs to be done to get back to a full level of service. It may be more than just telling the chap at the other end how he fixed it, but also what he needs to do to get back up to speed, to get data restored, or whatever it happens to be. And finally, of course, there's incident closure. Really, we should be looking at, within incident closure, making sure that the user is happy with what has happened. So often I see incidents being closed by different teams, and what's happened is that they close it down without even referring back to the user. Well, you've got to find out whether the user actually is happy with what has happened. So part of a good incident closure is either customer satisfaction and going back to the person, making sure that it's resolved to their satisfaction. So here we go, going into a bit more detail. We record it. We look at these things. It's normally recorded at the service desk. We record all incidents, although we'll talk about that in a few minutes' time, whether we record absolutely every single one. And we have a look at, does it comply to the service level agreement for a particular service? So when we start looking at the service that's being affected, we look at the service level that has already been agreed to make sure that we are going to treat it in the right way. Record all relevant data. And that little sentence there, as I've just been saying a couple of minutes ago, is a very short four-worded sentence, but in it encapsulates a whole host of trouble for a lot of people on service desks do not record properly. And what happens is, as I say, you put garbage in, you get garbage out. It's very difficult to go back and to learn from mistakes, to use those incidents to recover and restore from other things that happen of a similar nature in the future. So a very important thing, that recording basis is done properly. And obviously there's the facility for other people, not on the service desk, to report incidents quickly as well. And I would encourage those of you who don't yet hasn't got into sort of self-service mode, whatever that happens to be, by email or on the internet or even by Facebook and Twitter, to really consider that as a mechanism for getting data into the system and for logging calls. It does mean, however, talking about the data side, that we do have to consider quite well what has happened to the data and maybe have to massage it to make sure that we understand what the true problem is, the true incident is, and get it up to speed so that it sits in the database with enough and sufficient data. We then categorize it. Now, again, mention this categorization. So there's two aspects, really. We're trying to determine the incident type. You know, for example, the IT service has been degraded, and the thing that is affected. And we talked last time about the things that deliver service, and those things being assets, or as we call them in ITIL, configuration items. We look at those ones that have been affected. And when we note down on the incident, we really should understand the type that is the service that's being affected, and indeed the configuration item that's also been affected by the incident, because both of those things will dictate how quickly we should then respond to it. And obviously we should use some sort of standardized coding criteria. Normally these things are very well handled by the tool sets, such as you have with ManageEngine, so that it's done for you and you just have to pick from a predetermined list. Any of the tool sets are just perfect. ITIL cries out and was crying out for a long time for good tool sets to be able to help people do this stuff more effectively. And of course that's what we have here. We then prioritize it. Now of course all these things here, categorizing and then especially the prioritization, is all to do with the service. We don't just look at an incident and say, oh, that feels like it's a oh, I think that's quite severe. Who's on the call? Oh, it's somebody very nice. Yeah, they're a mate of mine. I'm going to do that for them. No, we do it on the basis of a set routine, a set number of things, like how important is that service to the organization. We can't really go into the service level agreements much in this webinar, but really it's an art in its own right, making sure there are agreements between IT and the business so that IT understands what is important. So if the business says, the finance department at month end is absolutely vital, you have to keep them up and running, they're your priority at month end, then sure enough you have to make sure that finance are the most important people, and you prioritize them. So here we have an example list of prioritizations and severities to that set. Level 4, there's no business impact, like there's no loss of service. Level 3, a minor loss of service, right the way up to a complete loss of service. Now some of these things are very standard things that you get from the ITIL books, or you can make them up yourselves, and some of the tools have these predefined in them. But it is worth being quite simple on these things. I wouldn't go into a lot of priorities and severities. There's one organization I was at the other day which had 18 different levels of severity. When you come to use that on the desk, it's very difficult to work out, is it 17 or 16? I don't know. Is the sun shining? It gets very, very esoteric at that point. No, very, very clear priority and severity levels as you have here, maybe 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. And then, of course, once you've done that, then it's a case of escalating it. And the tool sets help you escalate very, very effectively, because what we need to do is to manage and what happens to those incidents. If the first person who gets hold of it within an incident process cannot resolve it, hasn't got the tool set or the experience, then obviously they need to be escalated as quickly as possible to allocate the right resources if necessary, either horizontally, i.e. someone within the same group, same incident management function, or vertically into other groups, specific, second line, third line, however you like to look at it. And obviously there should be rules around how those things escalate. And one of the things that we do need to have here is the fabled bounce count. We need to work out and make sure that that stays very low. Bounce count, for those of you who have not come across this entertaining term, is all to do with the number of times an incident bounces, is knocked back, if you like, between the different groups. As someone says, it's a bit like hot potato. Someone says, oh, I don't want this, it's a bit too complex, hands it on to another group who thinks exactly the same and passes it on to yet another group. Incidents can go rebounding around the system like a ball around a squash court quite for many times if you don't have a careful eye on how many times it's actually been passed from one group to another. And that's the function of the service desk, or whoever is owning that particular incident. And I would say ownership is a vital piece of any incident management, service management process. And I've sent that right at the bottom again, accurate data. I should sort of put it on every slide actually. Every time anything is touched with an incident process, accurate data all the way through. And then of course we come to the end of the process where we have to resolve, recover and restore. So when we come to resolve it, and you'll see this in a minute, we look for known errors. I'll explain that in a second, or existing workarounds. We resolve the incident with the solutions or workarounds, and sometimes the solution will mean that a request for change, an RFC, needs to be submitted. So the incident isn't just an end in itself. It actually does move on, as we'll see in a second, to being resolved through the problem process and indeed through the change process as well. And let's not forget, and I think this should be the mantra, this piece in red should be stuck across everybody's screen, or maybe we can talk to ManageEngine to make it flash up on people's desktops every 3 seconds. But the goal of incident management is to restore service. That's what it's all about. Best off for the whole organization if nothing ever failed. But that nirvana scenario obviously doesn't happen. Things happen, people happen, equipment fails, people don't turn up for work because they're sick. So things just don't work. A good incident management process restores the business to normal operation as quickly as possible. That is our mantra. We should almost be saying it every couple of seconds as we're walking around trying to fix incidents. But that's the goal, and that's really what incident management is all about, that process that I've just run through. So some key things that I just sort of throw out here that are very important, don't particularly fit anywhere nicely, so I've put it right in the middle of the presentation. Take ownership for an incident, either as an individual or as a group, and tool sets that allow you to do that even better. I've got a workload list of things that I am doing. The person responsible that you can say, right, who's got this? George over there has got this particular incident. He's going to run it through. There's a contact point for the user. There's someone who's got a responsibility to make these things work. If he can't, he has a responsibility to pass it off to someone who can. And depending on how you work, either he keeps hold of the incident and manages it on the way through and ensures other people do the job, or he passes it off and ensures that the next person takes the ownership, the baton, if you like, of the relay race on with them. We want to keep a focus on the incident. There's no blindsiding. Forgive me if I use the wrong term here, those of you who are in the States, but no blindsiding. We want to make sure that that incident is the key thing. We don't want to be put off by other things that crop up that we find within the incident. One incident may spawn other incidents of different type. That's fine. But what we need to do is keep really, really focused on the thing that is in hand and not get put off by other things around the edge. Escalate to the people at the right time in an appropriately swift manner, and also swiftly escalate to management if there is a problem in terms of doing things or getting stuff done. That often happens in service desks, that things just sort of dribble around and sort of sit there because people don't like touching them. It's almost like a negative bounce count. Bounce count goes one very hot potato incident round to different people. You've almost got this type of incident that sits there and nobody wants to touch it, so nothing ever happens to it. Again, that's what managers are there for, and that's why service desk and good service desk management helps people understand and takes ownership of the problem. I suppose this next point should be in pulsating red letters, keeping the customer informed. Again, the customer is the key point here, and I think all of us, I think actually these days we all understand the customer and the user that's on the end of the phone to us, because we're often the customer on the end of the phone to other people in our everyday lives. When we use IT equipment, we're onto the bank at home or whatever we're doing on the internet. We like to have service given to us very quickly. We like to be served and looked after very, very effectively and very well. So we understand these things now, and being informed about what's going on is a really important part of ensuring that the business carries on, because if the customer knows they're not going to get a speedy delivery because of whatever, or resolution, then maybe they can do something to help themselves by doing something else. Keep them informed, keep them happy. Act as an interface between the different groups, again if you're owning it but other people are doing things on it, and then keep track of time and activities. It's all very good just fixing one problem, but if your workload list has got 20 on it, just keep an eye on those other things. It's very important to make sure that the priority calls that are coming in are looked after. You may be doing something for somebody that is important, but if you're Amazon and the main website goes down the ordering piece, then really you have to get onto that as quickly as possible. It's all to do with those services. And coming back to a different incident management process, and obviously, as we know from ITIL, that although there are a couple of set processes within the ITIL framework, there are many interpretations and many implementations. That's the good thing about ITIL. It's flexible, it is best practice, it gives you ideas of how to do things. So look at your incident process and see how it can be adapted to your business, to your organization, and see if tweaks can work. This particular one is quite an interesting one because we have the customer contacting the service desk, creation of a ticket, the issue being identified. Is it an incident? But no, it might be a service request. More of that in a minute. If it is, we come on to this thing called known errors and outages. If it is there a workaround that we can apply? If not, then it goes for escalation. So what we're going to be doing now is moving into the whole area of how incidents interrelate with things like problems and those sorts of things as well. First off, though, touching on service level agreements, these are the things within an incident that are so important to be aware of, because these are the things that allow us to identify which thing to work on first. Now, don't forget, service level agreements are those things that that should be, not always are, should be negotiated and agreed with the organization of a certain level of response. Now, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes SLA are just imposed by IT on the rest of the organization, which sometimes has to happen because that's just the way it works, and organizations don't necessarily always help. But these things should be agreed with the organization so they know that when something happens, they're going to get a response in a certain time frame. Again, we're setting expectations, we're helping people out, we're trying to be good members of the organization so that they can work within the framework. If something takes 4 hours or 8 hours or 2 weeks to fix, that's how long it takes. But we need to tell the business that and get their agreement on that. Therefore, we can start looking at ways around it to ensure the business carries on working. We work with the business in terms of SLAs. Different SLAs for different things, different priorities, different configuration items. So a server probably has a much higher priority than someone's desktop PC, unless maybe that desktop PC is something to do with the payroll system at the end of the month. A particular user, you know, the MD is, or the managing director, chief exec, is always an important person to ensure they get it right. But are they actually more important than the sales guy at the end of the month who's trying to get some contracts through and he can't get a particular email out of the system for whatever reason, the attachment doesn't work? Sometimes those people at the end of the month when they're trying to get contracts in are more important than even the chief executive. However, it might appear the other way around. Very important to be very clear about what is important, who is important, and when is important. And it's got to be appropriate to the organization. Obviously, different organizations, they vary so considerably one to another. But again, let's come back to service. What are the services? And the aim here is to restore those things as soon as possible, given the importance of the service. Now, I know I keep going on about this, but it is actually so vital that we get that into our heads. And make sure when you set the tool sets up, a lot of these things have got default settings. Just have a look at them, check them through, see if they fit your organization. Don't necessarily take them as gospel. Okay. Oops, shooting on a bit too far there. Okay, which brings us into the whole area of how incidents link into problems and other things. They don't just exist on their own. And here we have the idea of a major incident. Well, what's the difference in a major incident and just a normal incident? Well, it's very hard to assess, and I think this will depend on the organization, and in some senses it's going to be a question of looking at the service, look at the thing that's affected, and coming to a judgmental decision. But basically these are things that are happening, unplanned or temporary interruptions to a service with severe negative consequences. Here is an idea here of an iceberg where you have the nice visible fluffy portion floating above the waves, and beneath it the titanic sinking rock that is floating around underneath, that is absolutely there to sink an organization. So the more you have of an incident, the more likely it is that you're going to be having a particular major problem en route. So the more you have, the more likely it is that you've got one, which is what this is trying to show here. But also major incidents, the incidents that combine to create one can be very many and varied, and not necessarily obviously interrelated. They could be between things that are happening, poor processes, human error, oversight, shortcuts, things that are just going on. It could be a number of these things all coming together. But as you come into the more and more of these things, and you get a huge iceberg floating around, that's when a major incident can start coming together, almost like a typhoon, that comes together to then wreck the organization. And that's where we need to be very clear, and this is where a good tool and a good service desk is absolutely vital to spot the disparate trends coming in. Now some things are fairly straightforward. If something goes down, if a server goes down and takes a major application with it, you're going to get the service desk flooded with a number of calls about the same thing. That's probably fairly obviously a major incident, depending on obviously the service that's gone down. But do take care to think about the breadth of things that may be under the water that you can't see that could be equating to a major incident. And that's where we start bringing problem management in. We start thinking about, well, I've had a few of these things, and my gut feel is this is indicating that we've got something else going on. And this is where incidents lead on to problems and a whole problem process. And the whole point of having the problem process is that we can get access to a bit more data. We go into things in a bit more rigor than we otherwise would do. So from an from a problem point of view, it's trying to come to the cause, probably unknown, of one or more incidents. So the activities that someone would use, things like root cause analysis, looking at workarounds and systematic removal of the root cause, eventually by change requests, is the key thing. We're looking at what is the underlying problem, and there is a process, a problem process, that we can use to do that. So what we normally have is a number of incidents coming together, either that are the same type, or, as I've just been suggesting, of things that are vaguely connected that suggest something much more fundamental coming together to be used to then ensure that we resolve these things properly. Now, when we do identify the underlying cause, then obviously we might, and it might take many incidents to understand that root cause. When we've identified that causal factor, we get what's known as a known error, something that's sitting there. We know if we poke this particular system in a particular way, it's always going to respond in a particular way. It falls over, or we get a particular error message. So that is something that we know, and we can publish, we can communicate that sort of thing. But also, when we're looking in the incident process at resolving some of these things, we need to understand what those known errors already are so that we can readily identify them in two ways. One, we can tell users about them so that we don't have to keep letting them phone up and us tell them, but also so that we can then identify them very straightforwardly and see what's happening. And then, if possible, to give people a workaround to that if one exists. And obviously, if a workaround does exist, then that's what's known in the system as a workaround, and we can start using that to quickly get people back up and running if we have one of these known issues floating around. But it must be part of the incident process. Is this thing that's just cropped up a known error, and have we got something to resolve it? And there's our incident process again, looking at the known errors and workarounds, etc. Which brings us on to another area here, just before we get on to the change side, of another way that we can help our incident process to be resolved. We've got the ability to use knowledge and incidents together in two particular ways. One of is in self-service. So if people are coming into log a call because they've got a problem or an issue and they don't understand something, there's the whole concept of self-help within things like self-service. So going into knowledge bases and FAQ documents and using script-based help if it's available in the tool sets. And what we're trying to do here is to guide a user through doing things themselves to try and sort their own problem out. That's still incidents, and we still need to record that fact because we need to understand how often these things are cropping up in the everyday life, but we need to make sure that we understand what those things are so that we can fix them or make things easier. So that's the first way that we can use knowledge. The second way is turning the whole thing around and looking at how incidents can construct knowledge. So what here is that we've got incidents that get put into the system. They obviously contain a description of the issue that's actually occurred. Now, if I'm talking about the fact of doing data properly, if we've made sure that that data is put in a good format in the first place, and maybe we have someone who goes into the calls, into the incidents afterwards and makes sure that they've been done properly, we can then use that, those incidents and those descriptions within the knowledge base as something to be searched on so that in the future we can find out what the resolution for that particular incident is. And we can either publish that so that the user can help themselves, or it's an available resource for the service desk to then go and sort out their own problems and see if it's been fixed in the past. But basically, knowledge informing both ways, trying to help people out as they come in through self-service, or indeed to be part of the knowledge domain, part of the knowledge base itself, to help resolve problems in the future. And they also inform the problem, i.e. a part of the inputs to the problem process. Some of the descriptions, the things that have been tried, and some of the issues go into the problem process and again can inform the whole resolution piece that comes into resolving a particular problem. And of course, any talk about incidents wouldn't be finished if we didn't talk about its application within the service desk as well. I've talked about it all the way through, to be honest. The service desk is shall we say, the service desk uses the incident management process. It's almost like the lightsaber to protect itself and protect the organization. And that obviously comes through incident logging, ensuring that customers get the satisfaction they need in terms of resolution as quickly as possible, or ensuring that they do get resolved as fast as they can, prioritizing those calls efficiently and effectively, providing that first line support in terms of trying to resolve them on the first go. So when someone rings up, the best way of doing it is to resolve it there and then, rather than have to push it through to another set of experts, second line, third line, or your networking group, or whoever it happens to be. We can fix it on first line. The person, the user, the customer gets up and running as quickly as possible. Service is guaranteed and maintained as fast as we can. Escalating to other members of the team if we don't know the answer ourselves, or other team members, teams themselves who have different expertise, and obviously communication between those groups and back to the customer. And finally, the service desk is responsible and should be responsible for containing and managing and collating, measuring, bringing together all those metrics that service management produces. How many did we have? How many of this particular category? How many for this configuration item? What severities? How many for this service? And then we start looking at the data that we've got here to start highlighting where we can improve service. And ITIL version 3 brought in this whole concept of continual service improvement. I mean, as if it was actually, to be honest, as if it was some great thing that no one else had ever thought of. But of course, people have been doing it for years. You guys out there have been long looking at the service and trying to improve it, seeing where it could be done. ITIL version 3 put a name to it, which is the whole idea of continual service improvement. But it's done by looking at the data that we've been capturing, analyzing the trends, keeping going over the same thing, seeing if we can improve where things have been breaking. So almost like problem management on the data of the service desk itself. But obviously the service desk, absolutely vital function, and the incident piece a vital part in their armory. But I would say, just as a word of warning here, and this is coming from years and years of experience, what I've seen with different service desks, do know when to stop when it comes to looking at that data. It's possible, and I've seen it sometimes, that people take more time and effort in trying to analyze every last detail, capturing every last piece of information, that sometimes it takes longer to log a call than it should do, that we start being counterproductive in terms of taking or slowing the whole process down. We want to understand what the configuration item is that is affected. We don't need to ask the person for the serial number, the RAM, and all the rest of it. If we're thinking about that and that's important, then we should start thinking of where that should come from, maybe the configuration or asset management databases. But we need to start looking at what's appropriate management information to manage on. Just the fact of an end-of-month report that says we've had and we've closed 4,000 calls, 4,000 incidents, is a great statistic. But what does it actually mean? Better that we've closed the one call that was caused the company to, or the company's websites to shut down. That's the sort of it's the resolution of service that's important. It's the significance of the data that we're putting forward. Those of you who know about network management know that we have these things called SNMP traps, the things that routers and computers and things like that, servers stick out when they're having a crisis. And occasionally network hubs and switches and things can produce many, many thousands of these things. Now, just telling people that we've had 45,000 traps is absolutely immaterial, except if one of them happens to take down the key service that is producing the company an awful lot of money. We have to make sure that the data is relevant and significant. So we should be talking about things like how the amount of time the services were up and available for use, the number of people that had good customer satisfaction ratings if they're external customers or even internal customers. We're looking at key facts, key data that is important to that in organisation. So in terms of some of those key performance indicators that we should be looking at, again, it comes down to what's important. So it's things like, if you're Amazon, it's making sure that you have 100% time up on your web store. If it's a manufacturing plant, it's making sure that you are producing to within whatever tolerance your machines happen to be rated for. You know, whatever it happens to be, 98, 100%, 50%, whatever it happens to be that's important to your organisation should be put in and then measured against it. And some of the key performance indicators, I would say, for the service desk are things like customer satisfaction, because that really does tell you how you're doing, because the customers are the guys who are delivering service, who are doing it for the business. And if they're happy, generally it means that things are going pretty well. Time to resolution is obviously a very important one, and key incident resolution, key incidents being those things that affect key services. So how quickly were they resolved? How quickly were they resolved within the service level agreed? So if you've agreed a 2-hour service level for some of your key applications and services, then if you're hitting it, then you're good and you're on target. If you start wandering over the top of that, then obviously that's where the customer, that's where the business starts to be at risk of not being able to do what it needs to do. And finally, how does it feel against service catalog and service request? What's the difference? Well, it's a very fine line, to be quite honest, and the service catalog obviously is a place where a lot of those services are delivered. The service request is how you get access to those services, be it software, hardware, or whatever it happens to be. So how do you determine whether it's a service request or an incident? Well, some people put service requests in as incident, and actually there's nothing wrong with that. The purists might complain slightly and say that you shouldn't do it. I take a much more pragmatic view. It's whatever works for you as an organization. From a purist point of view, though, yes, it is possible to hide these things off because they have definable ways of doing things, and it's possible to do things in a particularly different way. So what we need to do is to understand what a service is and when an incident is a service. So some of the alternate incidents that we have here are things like new hire, leaver, lever, equipment request, software provision, and a virus scan. There isn't a right answer of whether it should be an incident or a service request, but what we're trying to do here is to ensure that we have the right way of approach, that we do things in the right way and at the right time, and that the service levels are taken accordingly. Other things that happen there is that you define the process for that particular thing, and you manage it then by the priority, and then set realistic SLAs. So whether it's an incident or whether it's an SLA is really entirely up to you, but whichever it is, make sure that those things are defined properly and you understand which are service requests, how you treat them, and then managed accordingly. Some of those things that you have as different incident or service request processes, things like the HR tasks in terms of the new hire process, a list of things that you have here, and in terms of things like IT tasks that go along with it, so the HR tasks from the recruitment request, the health cover range, and all those pieces, and then the IT tasks that go along with it. And that's the new hire process that can be encapsulated within an incident or within a service request. And of course, when it comes to change, many incidents make a problem, and a problem then gets sorted out and resolved through the change process. That means you get an accurate analysis, an identification there of the configuration items that are resolved, and a good problem analysis that touches all particular incidents. And obviously here what we're trying to do is to have a link to known errors and to workarounds. And then what we can then do is ensure that once we've seen all the different incidents, we have a particular problem, and then we see the change that solves the problem, which then solves all those particular incidents. And finally, obviously it comes down to configuration management, knowing what things deliver a service, the configuration items, and that's defined by all the relationships that are contained within the configuration management database, knowing what is important and how it connects to each other. And obviously that involves understanding the impact that is then had on the organization through impact analysis. So finally, why incident management? It's all to do with knowing what's important, who is the most important service to, who is the customer, who is the contact, what's the expected fixed time. And what we're trying to do is not fight the same fires over and over again. What we're trying to do is to build a better and more repeatable process around the incident thing, so that we actually do this firefighting much better in a much more efficient and effective way possible. Building on the knowledge of a call, documenting what's happened, who did what, and when they did it. And obviously if we're doing this, what we're trying to do is to avoid the duplication of work, continually doing things time and time again, the same thing repeatedly. We don't want to keep making the same mistakes and allowing the business to get into difficulty. We're really trying to ensure that things are done properly. And it also, as I said before, avoids the difficult tasks being ignored, the bounce count, etc. And finally, it should ensure that communication occurs between the individual and the users and the groups that are then involved, and also the different groups that are involved in the service desk, the different incident management groups, etc. So just to wrap up then, incident management, absolutely vital piece of the jigsaw in terms of delivering service to an organization, restoring the service, the good service that's absolutely vital in an organization to ensure that the business carries on work. The longer a service is down, the more at risk the business is from competitors or losing money or whatever. So incident management, it does work. It allows us to restore a service as quickly as possible. It informs the problem and the change process, and it allows us to effectively do for the business what it needs to do in keeping those services alive and running. So on that note, I'm going to pass back to Joseph for a little piece from ManageEngine.
Thank you, Neil. It was a wonderful presentation. We have a couple of questions for you. First of all, who should be the major decision maker in creating an SLA, IT or other parties involved?
Well, I mean, to be honest, the service that's being delivered is a business service, so it's the service that the business needs. So in that case, I'd say really it should be the business that's in the driving seat. But obviously, it's got to be IT that actually sort of can put some common sense around it. There's no point in the business shouting and banging its fist on the table and stamping its feet and saying, no, we've got to have a fix within 10 minutes. You know, it's just unrealistic. We have to bring to the table the reality of IT and what IT problems, or how long it can take IT problems to be resolved. So we need to be realistic, but we also need to bring alternatives. So sometimes we also need to bring to the table, well, it's going to be 2 weeks, but we know that's not going to be acceptable, but how about doing this, that, or the other? So I think it's probably, I'd say, IT should be in the driving seat, but it has to take its prioritization, its importance from the business.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Okay, one more question before we go into the 10-minute product brief about Service Desk Plus. The last question for Neil would be, we usually resolve incidents and let the system close them automatically after 3 days. What is the recommended approach?
Well, this is one of those things where what ITIL is all about is best practice, and it's really what works best for you. In some cases, what we can do is, what some service desks do is to go back to the individual user and confirm with that individual user that everything's all right. Now we can do that, and if we haven't heard back from them in 3 days, I mean, that sounds a very reasonable way of working. There are other ways of doing it. We could say, if we haven't heard from you, or we're going to close it unless we hear from you. But I think there has to be some involvement with the end user, some agreement with the end user that everything is okay with the thing that's been fixed. But I think it's very sensible to say, if you haven't heard back, then yes, go ahead and close it in 3 days. I'd say is eminently sensible.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Now we have Bhaskar with us. He's a product consultant, and he will take us through a 10-minute session of how Service Desk Plus handles incident management. And we also have a couple of more questions which Bhaskar would take after his 10-minute brief about the product. Bhaskar, take over.
Hi, this is Bhaskar, product consultant from ManageEngine, and I'm going to explain you how Service Desk Plus handles incident management. Let's move on with the creation of a particular incident. We have different modes of creating a request. One is an email, where you can configure an email address for your support, and anyone sending an email to that address will be converted as an incident, like you see on the screen. And the other way is a phone call, where an end user calls up the support agent, who will in turn file a request using this form. Another option is a self-service portal, where you give access to a portal for the end users. So once they come in here for filing a request, they can go for a knowledge base, a search in the knowledge base. If they find the solution, they can actually fix their own problem. In case if they don't, they can go ahead and file a new incident. So once they file a new incident, these incidents will be listed under the request tab, as the technician can view these tickets and pick those tickets. And before creating a ticket, when you input the requester details like username, Service Desk Plus has an option to import the requesters from the Active Directory. So the details of these users will automatically populate, and also the assets which are belonging to the user will be shown here. By this, we will be avoiding unwanted question asking the requester about what is the asset he's using and the hardware configuration of it. And next we move on to the urgency and priority with the impact. You can choose the impact and the urgency. This can be configured as a priority matrix under the admin section. This helps you to determine the right priority based on the business impact and urgency. This is also one of the ITIL best practices, and also we have given you the flexibility to modify the business urgency and impact and the priority, and the users and the technician can override this priority matrix. But we do not recommend this. Next, we're going to look into the classification of incidents. You can classify different types of incident into different categories, like you see on the screen. We support a hierarchy of category, a subcategory, and an item, using which a type of incident can be granularly categorized. So an incident categorization is very important, which helps you understand the source of all incidents. And next, you can choose the group and the technician and file a request. We're going to look into the business rules. All these parameters like category, subcategory, the group, and the technician, which can be automatically set using the help of a business rule. Business rule automation in Service Desk Plus helps in organizing the incoming request and perform any action from categorizing an incident, delivering them to a group, and assigning them to a technician. So here is where the business rule, you go ahead into admin, business rules. We can define a criteria. We can perform an action as to place into a group of all high priority tickets. And you also have an option to email and SMS a particular technician when a business rule is executed, which should be helpful when a technician is aware of what the ticket is being assigned to him as well. And now we're going to look into the templates available, which can be configured under the admin section. The frequently occurring issues or incidents such as email or printer problem can be configured as templates. With all these parameters pre-populated, which makes an incident logging much easier. So you can pre-populate these fields. Say, for example, if this is a printer issue template, you can configure these values and save it as a template. So whenever a technician would like to create a request for a printer problem, he can get into the new incident button and select the printer problem template. This will automatically fill in those field information. And next we're going to look into how acknowledgements are sent to the end users. So once I create a ticket with the requester name, an acknowledgement email is sent to the end user with the ticket number so that the next time when he calls the help desk, he can refer the ticket number. And we're going to look into the service level agreement. Once an incident is created in service desk, the SLA helps us to set a due by time for a particular request. So here you can see the created date, the due by time, and the response due by time. The due by date is the resolution due by date, and the response time is going to be the first response for this particular ticket. And this is configured under admin service level agreement. So for a request, after a set period of time, if the request is unattended by a service desk agent, it will send an automatic escalation email to another technician that the service desk, the incident is violated. So you can configure the response level SLA and the resolution SLA over here. For this, I have set a priority of high for a mail fetching issue. The response level should be within 1 hour, the first response, and a resolution within 8 hours. You can also enable escalation so that the other tech gets notified when this SLA gets escalated. So once a ticket is created with an SLA, a technician looks in for a resolution for this particular ticket. In Service Desk Plus, we provided you the convenience of searching for solution in a particular ticket based on the subject of a particular email. Service Desk search for resolution. So here you get the list of solutions available in the knowledge base. You can select the solution and copy it to the actual incident. And once it is copied, you can make use of the status to be changed over here to be resolved. And as a technician, I can also add the work log of how long I have been working on this particular ticket, the time spent, and the troubleshooting that I have been through this particular incident. So an incident must be closed only if the end user confirms that the resolution that I have provided is a valid one. For this, we have a parameter under admin request closing rules. So here is where we're going to define the mandatory fields which has to be filled in before you close a particular request. And this is what I was talking about, acknowledgement from an end user. And also, Neil was talking about automation close of a particular ticket. Here you can set, once a ticket is moved to a resolved state, you can set an automation close where you can specify the number of days, 3 days, after which a particular ticket gets automatically closed. This is also an important ITIL best practices, where the technician doesn't have to constantly follow up for the response from the end user. And next we're going to look into the satisfaction from the end user. We have an option under admin survey settings. There was also a question from one of our the attendee. What is the method do you use to evaluate the customer satisfaction? So for that, we have an option to enable survey, which can be enabled for every ticket created in service desk and closed. This satisfaction level can be, the result of the survey will be shown under the survey result. And their additional comments will also be listed below. And going to the reporting module of how incident management can be best evaluated here, you have a predefined more than 100 reports that you can generate based on SLA violation, the number of incoming tickets per day, and the pending tickets for each group, technicians, and the list of tickets with high priority you can take a report under the reporting section, and you've got option of making your own custom reports for all requests and choosing the type of fields that you require. So by this, incident management will best work with Service Desk Plus. So I'll also look into another question that was submitted by an end user here. We are currently using Service Desk Plus version in our IT department. We would like to expand the system to the HR department, finance, and other as well, for the users to enter a service request. How can we do this? In Service Desk Plus, the enterprise version holds the feature of service catalog, by which you can add a service category. So these are predefined service category which are available, and adding a service to a service category will allow you to choose the list of users to whom you want to show these service. So the user groups can be configured under admin user groups. And you have a criteria that you could choose here. So job title is so you can set a filter using which it will show you the list of users who belongs to the IT department. And once a service request is configured, you can show this only to the IT department, by which the other user groups will not have access to this service. So by this we conclude the session on how best we can use incident management in Service Desk Plus.
Thank you, Bhaskar. That was really helpful. And thank you, Neil. Very good session today. So thank you everybody for joining in. We will get in touch with you, and for more details about other webinars and the previous webinars from this series, you can log in. You can get into www.servicedeskplus.com. There we have other webinars also available. We will also make this webinar available as a recorded version in our website servicedeskplus.com. Thank you all for attending, and we'll keep you updated on the other webinars. Thank you.